Yes, Rogue Galaxy, my most personal favorite action RPG for the PS2, and one of my favorite aspects of this game are the characters. In this countdown, I'll be listing off my favorite playable characters from Rogue Galaxy, but I should make a few things clear here. First off, this will be a pretty well detailed list about each character's ability and a bit about the character's personality and their backstory. I will first talk about the character's personality and story, then their main weapon and secondary weapon, and then their abilities. Secondly, just because the character is low on this list, that doesn't mean I don't like that character. It just means in terms of gameplay, I don't like this character as much as others. So with that being said, let's start this list. Oh, also there will be spoilers, so you have been warned. Number 8. Now, like I said, I don't hate this character, but Simon is my least favorite character to play as in Rogue Galaxy. Simon himself is a really nice and friendly guy, and a bit gullible. Plus, he has a great accent and is really likable. Simon has an interesting backstory as well. Before joining the Dorgongoa Pirates, Simon had a wife and daughter. But one day while working, there was an accident and Simon ended up getting seriously injured. Because of the accident, Simon left his family and hides his face in fear of being a disgrace to his family. He decides to join the Dorgongoa Pirates in order to travel the galaxy. It isn't until the events of the game starts when Simon starts to run into his wife and child who have been traveling across the galaxy in search for him. And at the end of the game, Simon comes to terms with his accident and heads back home to his loving family. So yeah, as a character, I really like Simon, but when it comes to gameplay, I'm not a big fan. Simon's main weapon is a gun or a flamethrower, which isn't bad, but this weapon kinda prevents Simon from being very mobile. And his secondary weapon is a rocket launcher, which yes, is awesome, but this weapon is slow and it ends up leaving Simon very vulnerable. But thankfully Simon has some very good abilities. Amplification, which doubles his weapon's damage and range. Missile Squall, which allows Simon to fire a bunch of missiles off at all the enemies. Wall of Smoke, which creates a thick layer of smoke to confuse enemies. Gamelian X, a drink that raises attack and defense power of all allies. Shake Shake, in which Simon causes an earthquake damaging all enemies. Raging Dragon, in which Simon shoots out a dragon made of fire that attacks all enemies. Ghostbuster, which changes Simon's weapon and increases his attack power. And Last Resort Meteor, in which Jupis and Simon join together to create a meteor attack on all enemies. In the end, Simon is a great character, but not one I prefer to play as. Number 7. Oh, Jupis. Jupis is kind of a jerk. He can be obnoxious, rude, and arrogant. He is one of the smartest people in the galaxy and is a very successful scientist and hacker. The way the Dorgongoa Pirates first meet Jupis is when he first gets fired and ends up hacking an entire building as a way of revenge. And after Jaster and the other pirates stop Jupis, Jupis decides to join them. It isn't until towards the end of the game that Jupis finds out that his work was sabotaged by his assistant. His assistant ruined Jupis' work because he found a mistake and decided to ruin his work so he would get fired instead of letting Jupis ruin his own career. Jupis feels bad for how he had acted and decides to make amends at the end of the game, and does. So yeah, personality wise, I really don't care too much for Jupis. I don't hate him, but I don't like him. I tolerate him. Jupis' main weapon is his spear, which is awesome because it gives him a decent range and makes him a good fighter against most type of enemies. His secondary weapon are flying discs, and while he has to remain still in order to use them, they are decently fast and do some good damage. His abilities, on the other hand, are just okay. Aromatic Boost, which is a scent that boosts the attack power of all characters. Pooty, which stops enemies' movements with the use of gum. Yo-Yo Shock, in which Junipis attacks all enemies with an electrical yo-yo. Crash Ball, that charges Junipis' secondary weapon. Tornado Dance, in which Junipis does a dance that damages all enemies. 5 Alarm Fire, in which Junipis attacks all enemies with a fire attack. Terrible Tune, in which Junipis sings a song to attack all enemies. And Black Hole, in which Junipis and Steve must team up together to attack all enemies. Junipis' abilities certainly are interesting and unique, but he just isn't a character that I find myself using very often. Number 6. Yeah, Steve! Steve is kinda like C-3PO, except more active, stronger, and more likable. Steve is very kind, respectful, and usually positive with a voice that matches. He is a robot created by Dr. Picacio. How Steve managed to become a pirate, however, is unknown, but it is known as to why Steve was made. It turns out Dr. Picacio once had a young son who had died. Somehow, Dr. Picacio managed to make a program that emulates his son's personality. The program is inside Steve, and throughout the game, Dr. Picacio has Steve shut down so he can talk to his dead son. By the end of the game, police hear rumors of Dr. Picacio's program with his son on it, which is illegal. To prevent his father from getting arrested, Dr. Picacio's son destroys himself inside Steve. Dr. Picaccio is saddened by losing his son, and decides to make a brand new body for Steve that resembles his son. Personally, I really like Steve, both in his personality and with his relationship with Dr. Picaccio. I also really like his design. Now, Steve's main weapon is his hands, which aren't that great. He has a slow attack and a rather narrow combo. However, he does have a great charge attack. His secondary weapons are two small drones that shoot at enemies, which are useful but can only be used when standing still. His abilities are Electro Punch, which makes Steve's fist electrified and more powerful. Protection, which is a beam that increases the defense for all allies. Center of Attention, which draws all enemies' attentions to him, causing the enemies to be distracted and immobilized. Ice Eye Beam, in which Steve shoots cold beams at all enemies, damaging them. Zap, in which Steve creates a strong electrical charge that attacks all enemies. Hyperdrive, which increases Steve's attack power. Wave Jammer, which is a move that creates an electrical pulse that only damages mechanical beasts. And Strange Beam, in which Steve and Digo join together to create an attack that damages all enemies. In the end, I really like Steve, as he does have some really good abilities and a nice story. However, he has poor physical combat skills. Number 5. Digo the man, dog, person, thing. Digo is a kinda quiet but strong character. His backstory involves him once being in the army and befriending a man named Gale. However, one day the two of them are sent on a deadly mission in which Digo gets severely hurt and believes he lost his friend Gale. Digo then becomes a miner and spent most of his time at Angela's bar, drinking away his life while trying to avoid trouble. However, once the local mafia attacks Angela's bar, Digo decides to fight back. By doing so, Digo runs into Gale, who became bitter and angry after their experience with the war. After losing his friend Gale, Digo decides to join the Dorgongoa pirates to redeem himself. I don't hate Digo. He's a decent character. I just don't find him that interesting. He's just okay to me. Digo's main weapon is an axe, which has a nice range, but it's quite slow. His secondary weapon is a handgun, which can only be fired while standing still, and it's only okay. As for his abilities, he has Break Throw, which doubles the power and range of thrown objects. Top Dog, which increases the attack power of his axe. Bone Shield, which increases the defense of all allies. Wonder Howl, in which Digo lets out a howl that damages all enemies. Flash Bomb, in which Digo throws a bomb that damages all enemies in range. Covering Fire, in which Digo calls out some helicopters to shoot down at all enemies, damaging them. Our Song, which increases his attack power. And Eternal Soldier, in which Digo and Zegram join together to increase each other's attacks and defense for a while. Altogether, Digo has some decent weapons and abilities. However, I just don't find myself using him as often or really that interested in his character. Number 4. Here's a character I didn't expect to have this high on my list. Kisala is a stepdaughter of Captain Dorgongoa. She is a kind, confident, respectful, and free-spirited girl. It turns out that she is actually the daughter of the royal family of Maryglin. After the gang helped restore the balance of Maryglin's past, Kisala decides to go to the present Maryglin and rule over as queen. Oh, and supposedly her and Jaster had some kind of romance together. However, for me, it came out of nowhere and really isn't that convincing. Though Kisala is a good character, I just don't find her all that interesting. Gameplay-wise, she is quite good. Her main weapons are daggers that allow her to have fast and fluid attacks that are effective for almost every enemy. The only downside is her small range. Her secondary weapon is her shoes, which also have fast and effective kick combos. Because of these weapons, it makes her a very fast and stealthy fighter, having some great ground combos and air combos. Her only downside is that she has no long range attacks. As for for her abilities, she has Star Charm, in which she summons stars to attack all enemies. Dagger Slash, which gives her daggers the element of ice and increases her attack power. Angel's Kiss, in which she lets out a holy kiss that attacks all enemies. Tones of Purity, which protects all allies from status ailments. Starshine, in which she summons explosive stars that attack all enemies. Deadly Stench, in which she throws a dirty sock at the enemies, possibly killing them instantly. Star-Linked Venus, where Kisala and Lilika join together in a dance that damages all enemies. And Spinning Moon, where Kisala, Jaster, and Digo all join together in an attack to create a devastating attack that damages all enemies. Altogether, she has a lot of great and useful abilities, and as a character, I really enjoy using her. Number 3. As a main character, Jaster is pretty good. He is a lot like Luke Skywalker. Jaster was raised on a desert planet and he never knew his parents. During a hunt and search for Desert Claw, Jaster gets mistaken for the hunter Desert Claw and ends up on the Dorgongoa crew. Towards the end of Jaster's journey, he finds out that he is a descendant of the Star King, making him some kind of special supernatural human thing. Yeah, sorry, that part didn't really make much sense to me. Oh, and I guess he has romantic feelings for Kisala. Again, I didn't find the relationship that convincing. Jaster is a kind and responsible person, and I do like him, but he isn't that interesting. But what about his gameplay? Well, his main weapon is a sword that gives him a good combo and range. He's good at fighting ground enemies and flying enemies. His secondary weapon is a blaster, which is quite good, but Jaster does have to stand still in order to use it. As for his abilities, he has Flash Sword, which gives his sword the element of lightning and increases his attack power. Break Throw, which doubles the power and range of thrown objects. Whirlwind, which increases the speed and enables direct contact attacks. Illusion Sword, which allows Jaster's sword to be able to shoot long-distance projectiles when using his sword. Desert Wind, in which Jaster creates a sandstorm that attacks all enemies. Shooting Star, which changes Jaster's attack to a more powerful attack. Fated Passion, in which Jaster and Kisala join together to use an attack that damages all enemies. And Supernova, in which Jaster, Kisala, and Zegram all join together to create an attack that damages all enemies. In the end, Jaster has some pretty good abilities, and he's a pretty well-rounded character, making him easy for anyone to play as. Number 2. Lilika, the warrior chief of the Bakuraka tribe. She hails from the planet Jaraika. Long ago, when she was younger, Lilika went to pick some fruit with a younger sister, Miri, and their mother. While picking fruit, they were suddenly attacked by a creature called the Indivitor. The monster killed their mother and then started to head for Miri. As the monster started to attack Miri, Lilika remained still in horror and shock of the attack. Because of the attack, Miri became blind. Feeling guilty for not doing anything to protect Miri, Lilika tried to forget about what really happened and became a fierce and strong warrior, along with being extremely protective of Miri. As soon as Jaster and friends land on the planet Jaraika, they find out that Miri is going to be sacrificed to the sun god. Lilika tries to stop this, but suddenly the Indivitor reappears. With the help of Jaster and his friends, Lilika kills the monster. Afterwards, she decides to join the pirate crew. It isn't until towards the end of the game when Lilika sees a vision of her mother and comes to terms with the truth and moves on with her life. I actually kinda like the backstory, as it does do a good job of giving her motivation for being so responsible, strong, and protective. However, she does have a hot-headed temper, which I actually don't mind. I really like her character. But what about her gameplay? Well, her main weapon is a bow and arrows, which have a good long range and has a good auto-aim. Plus, her attack can be charged, however the attack is kinda slow. Her secondary weapon is a hatchet, which has fast attacks and decent combos. She's a really well-rounded character who's good at fighting all kinds of enemies. But what about her abilities? Well, there's Warrior God's Cry, which lets out a loud cry that increases the attack power of all allies. Blast Arrow, which gives her arrows firepower and increases her attack power. Shellbreaker, which increases the attack power of her hatchet. Voodoo Dance, which is a dance that decreases the enemy's defense along with causing damage. Beast Call, in which she summons a local monster to help the party fight the enemies. Serpentine Arrow, which blesses her arrows with the element of light for attacking enemies. Wild Thing, in which she summons arrows down from the sky to attack all enemies. Advent of the Sun, in which Lilika and Jupitus join together to create a powerful attack that attacks all enemies. Altogether, I really like Lilika, as I find her fun to play as and has some awesome abilities. Number 1. And now, by the process of elimination, you have probably figured out who my favorite character is. So, without further ado, here's Zegram. Now, first, no, he's not my favorite character just because he's voiced by Steve Blum.
The Avatar needs to be reminded of the power I possess.
Zegram is the most pirate-like character in the whole crew. He's stern, strong, quiet, and a bit cocky. Before the events of the game, Zegram was in a relationship, and before settling down with his girlfriend, she was killed while trying to protect someone else. Upset by his loss, Zegram became more distant and selfish. During the events of the game, Zegram appears to be working with the Dorgangoa pirates, simply to get to the treasure they are all searching for. He does this because Volgog, the head of the Galaxy Corporation, promises him that if he steals the treasure from the pirates, then he will bring Zegram's girlfriend back to life. Zegram agrees and does steal some of the treasure towards the end of the game, but comes to terms with losing his girlfriend and rejoins the pirates. Though he really doesn't have a complex personality or backstory, I still really like him. His style and little quips I found to be really charming. To me, he's an awesome badass who's enjoyable to watch. But what about his gameplay? Well, his main weapon is a sword, which gives him strong strikes and is good against multiple types of enemies. However, he's a bit slow and has kind of a narrow range. His secondary weapons are his shurikens, which have great range and are quite fast. However, you have to remain still when using them. As for his abilities, he has Fire Sword, which infuses his sword with the element of fire and increases his attack power. Parry, which increases his ability to evade enemy attacks. Drunken Burst, in which he drinks some alcohol that increases all allies' attack power. Lightning, in which he calls forth a lightning bolt that attacks all enemies. Twin Sword, which allows Zegram to have a second copy of his sword, making him able to dual wield for a certain amount of time. Death Break, which is an attack that is capable of instantly killing all enemies. Inferno Vortex, which is a move where both Zegram and Simon join together to create an attack that attacks all enemies. And Gates of Hell, in which Zegram, Jaster, and Lilika all join together to create an ultimate attack that damages all enemies. In the end, I really love Zegram, as he has some great abilities that really do a great job at reflecting his personality. Also, his twin sword ability is fantastic for fighting bosses. Zegram is just one badass character who I really like. Well, I hope you enjoyed this countdown. I don't know when I'll be doing another one or what it'll be on. I do plan on doing some more countdowns like this in the future about my favorite characters from other RPGs. But until then, I'm MCB, the PS2 Gamer, and I'll see you guys next time.